this to me is one of the importance of why the data itself has to be available. And other different people have different concerns. Some people aren't going to worry about the errors, some are. And having all that information in the metadata, having the metadata available, having the data available as you want it, not as the person just make it available once you have it. So yeah, I can go to the web page, I can see a map, or I can go see a map of the eggs and the SST. But suppose I actually want to analyze that. Well, great, I have a web page of maps, and now what? I'm stuck. So this is the importance of actually having the data itself also available to the users. So I'm not deciding what's the best way for you to use it. I'm giving you the information you need to use it.
I actually have a related question on data quality, directed to Lani. You spoke of citizen science networks and spoke of the need for verification. But are you planning to code the data, to flag the data according to the reliability of the source? Because when we think about the ultimate uses for these data, people are going to want to document changes over time. And the reliability and the quality is a paramount issue. And I think people need to be able to pick the most reliable sources out of data archives.
Yeah, that's something we've thought about doing. Well, I mean, we'd have to have some kind of, a user to be able to do this. They'd have to have like a user login. And so any data would be coded with who contributed it. And then I'm not sure exactly how you do it, but do you give them a rating based on like how often they contribute data, or if they have expertise that they claim, they've been, if it's a researcher contributing data, or it's somebody who's a trained whale watch docent versus somebody who sees one thing once and reports it. But yeah, I'm very open to suggestions on how we sort of give people, I guess, classifications of their expertise. But yeah, that would be attached to the data so that you'd be able to tell.
Good. I hope you build that in right from the outset.
It seems like Marie has something to say about that.
I was suggesting, have you looked at the eBird site? I can't remember if it was Harold Figueroa who did it, but he's the one who told me about it. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's a citizen science for bird watching.
Right.
And they have lots and lots of things, including the person who's contributing can choose to be just, hey, I saw this bird here, or it can be, I spent 3 hours on this day from time X to time Y. So it really gives them, the person using it, the opportunity to be as rigorous or lax as they want, and then you can make queries accordingly.
Yeah, I've looked at the site a little bit, but I need to look at it more and see how they've done things, because I think it's a good model.
There's an analog through the Weather Service where they have people have their own weather stations. And to engage them fully, there's one level where you can see the map where just everything is shown, looks the same. But they're also all flagged, so people doing some of the more serious meteorological connections can know whether or not they want to use that. In most cases, they do not. But it appears as if they're all there to the casual user. And I think that might be a good analog at some level, as deceitful as it may be.
Anna, that's a good say.
Yeah, still kind of follow up on what Mark and Marie were both saying. With citizen science, how do you account for effort? Especially if you think of an app, first a couple people download, you have more and more people, so your effort might increase over time. So if you want to look at any long-term trends that Mark mentioned, it might actually just be the fact that now you have more people using your app out of the water looking. Yeah. Or, because that seems to me that would be an important thing to keep track of. Have you thought of how to integrate that? Or?
I've thought about it. I don't necessarily have any solutions. It's definitely an issue. I mean, it's an issue with any sort of vessel opportunity, opportunistic data collection. There's some work out of UBC looking at that a bit, because they have kind of a similar thing without the app, but with a citizen science data collection. And yeah, it's one of those ongoing questions that we always have. I mean, unless people are doing line transects and you know exactly where they are, even researchers have the same issue of if they're just recording when they see something, which a lot of people do, how do you quantify that? But yeah, I think that's definitely going to be an issue.
Sean?
I think along those lines, I actually have kind of two questions. One goes to David, and the other one goes more general. But David, with the stuff you were showing us today, how derived is that? Was it pretty raw, or is it pretty derived? And then the question is then, is there a way to see the underlying error structure or the data structure? And then I guess the question that's kind of coming along with this question about effort is, people don't really like reporting zeros, they like reporting ones. And so the quantification of those zeros is really tough. It'd be great if we could actually encourage people, like in the case with what you're doing, Lani, when they go out and they say, you know, I didn't see a doggone thing today. It'd be great to get that. But I don't think they really necessarily feel that good about putting that in. How do we get at that? Because as scientists, we really want to know about our data when we're combining errors. Are we creating a different error structure? And you know, that we could undermine the quality of our data very easily.
Okay, well, the data exists. However, it does not exist in the friendly forms. We just have to draw the line somewhere. It exists in the perfectly good form at the big labs, like Jeff Paulson lab, and places like that, and the DC, where you can get at everything, down to the nearest pixel. I wouldn't recommend it personally. You probably want to spend more time doing biology or whatever it is that you study. And there's a lot of training workshops going out there now for satellites. We run one that's specifically for applications. That is, we know people like to have sausage, or at least some do, but you don't want to know what goes inside it. Most of the others out there, and there's one at Cornell University, which is very good, but they concentrate on making the data. And I get a lot of people coming back from that course who expect to be doing like algorithm cauterization, and of course they're not going to do that. It's a waste of their time, to be quite honest, when there are other people who spend their lives doing this and are providing the data for us. So that's sort of my comment on that, is that you can always get there, but sometimes it's best just to call and ask. I can certainly direct you to the creator of any data set that's out there. And like I said, they want to talk to people who are using it.
I have a question for Lani. Lani, did you look at OpenC Map and compare that to your approach? And what are the differences between it?
Yeah, that's one that I've looked at early on. And, yeah, I mean, they have some really amazing things. It's all contributed from researchers, from my understanding. So that's one big difference. It's just the contributors, but it does have that instantaneous mapping aspect that I really like. So that's the primary difference. And like I don't know if I've emphasized this enough during the thing, is I'm definitely not trying to present that I'm doing anything totally new. It's just more merging things. You know, we have some of it over here, some of it over here, and trying to put it all into one thing so that it's kind of a seamless product where people can report their sightings, see the sightings, share the data, and it's not going to be limited geographically or by species. So I know there's ones, you know, for specific marine mammals that are online, or specific animal types, or in specific locations. And I'm hopefully, not being too ambitious, trying to make it just, you know, any marine mammal species worldwide. We'll start focusing here, obviously, just because that's where I am and where I've got connections. But then, if it works, then it'll spread, I hope.
So regarding that topic, one thing I might add is that even though you may choose a home, if you will, for your data, at least initially, as Roy was saying, it's all URL. You can think of it as URL distributed services where OpenC Map could have access to your data and be sort of ported through that site and serving whatever site chooses to serve it according to certain protocols for data sharing or something. Yeah. And I also want to mention a plot that Pacific Life, as part of their new funding proposals, are requiring funded researchers to deposit their data in OpenC Map data commons, just as a way of, it's there. There's already infrastructure for depositing data in certain standards, and that's certainly a way forward. Maddalena, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about the use of citizen scientists, and can be from Lani or anybody here. I think it's great to use them, but we need to be very careful. Yesterday at the Photo ID workshop, both Dave and John raised the question of harassment. This is something that is going on a lot right now along the coastal area in Santa Monica Bay. For instance, now we had blue whale, now there are fin whales. People's citizens are often not aware of regulations, so tend to go very close to species that are endangered species. So how do we deal with this if we give them an app, or if we take him, if they go go out with their own boat thinking to do something good and great, but at the same time they are harassing these whales. This is really an issue, in my opinion, now, and it's something that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree it's an issue, and the only thing that, you know, the one thing I could see that's a benefit is on an app, if, you know, we'll make it very clear, the guidelines, because I don't think everybody knows that they exist. And so if it's in very bold print, that, you know, first part of your screen, you can't approach any closer than, you know, 100 meters, and, you know, with the outline of it, that might help spread the word a little bit. But I'm definitely open to other ideas as to, yeah, I wouldn't want to do that, but.
Dave?
It's a question that's semi-related to this discussion, but it's on the MPAs. And with 50 MPAs, that to me all look relatively small. So how do you expect a voter to know where those are and what limits there are within those waters?
So education about the new MPAs is definitely a challenge. DFG has been more proactive than I would have expected. They've developed a mobile app that indicates where those MPAs are and what the regulations are within them. And then there's just a big effort of folks who have been working on this in Southern California to get the word out there. So we partner with the DFG to create waterproof maps that are now being distributed at several harbors. And I think they're also taking an approach to enforcement that's very educational. So many of the folks that are in an MPA and fishing will get approached by a warden who educates them first. And you know, if it's a repeat offender, they may get violated again.
Yeah, just one idea there. Rather than a waterproof map, if you had an application that actually said you're now in an MPA based on your GPS location, an interactive system like that, because people are going to go into them and out of them as they're transiting wherever they go. But I'm all for the process. I'm just curious to know, even myself, I oftentimes am going around thinking, am I in an MPA right now or am I not? So it would be nice to have that information real time.
And I think that's a great suggestion. And I think DFG's been working a little bit with the different GIS mapping groups and the, I don't know, but the different tools that they have on fishing vessels, but to get the new layers into those in the new updates. But I think, you know, mobile apps and indicating for, you know, for fishermen is really important. Yeah.
Back there, Dave.
I just wanted to make a general comment, and maybe see if there's a comment from the panel about data availability, and that is that it's something I've discovered recently, that quite often I've gotten a hold of data that I'm not really expert to use, and that is not, it's not within my domain, and what I'm trying to say is that I think it's often worth collaborating with experts in those areas in addition to trying to do it yourself. And there's, you know, lots of people out there that one's able to collaborate with, and quite often that collaboration is more profitable than just trying to do it yourself. So I think data availability is really important, but I think also being able to seek out the advice and collaboration of experts is important. And I don't know if you have any comment upon that. I mean,
yeah, I do actually very strongly. It's a lot of this data is public domain data, and the public can't get to it. And the idea that we know who it is that can analyze it correctly is, to me, very elitist. There may be people that can do a better job. In fact, how do we even know that you've analyzed it correctly unless someone else can get it and replicate your results? And that's one of the basis of science, replication of results.
I wasn't inferring that it should not be available to everybody. I'm just suggesting that there are people that are familiar with the properties of those data.
And what you can have for that is you have in the metadata info, is you have the people who, you know, develop the data, things like that.
Yeah.
You know, the owners, so that it can be contacted. The contact of the owner, that should all be available for the data.
Well, I guess that's what I'm saying. That's what I did, and I discovered using the data, I wasn't using it correctly after I contacted the person.
And if you look at it, if you look at a data set with good metadata, all that's available.
Sure.
You know, who originally published it, who's the owner, contact information, so that if you wanted to do that, you can do that.
Good.
But there's still a whole slew of public domain data. I mean, there's no question that it was paid for by government money and government policies that's available, and you can't get it. In fact, I can't even get data from my own center. I know people in the Northwest Fishery Center have been unable to get data from their own center. And there's no reason for that. Yes, people should be able to publish, so you put a 6-month, a year moratorium, whatever you want, but at some point it's public domain.
The thing is that once it's in the public domain, which is what we're striving for, there's always people who are going to misuse it and some people who are going to use it appropriately, and there's no way to try and control that or restrict that, I think.
I wasn't suggesting to control anything. I was simply suggesting that it's good to collaborate because there's experts out there that you can learn from. That's the only thing I was trying to say. I think you totally misinterpreted what I was trying to say.
But that's why you need good metadata in the data, because that information is there.
Well, certainly we're all here interested in collaboration, so point taken, Dave. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Can I add one thing to that? Because I think it's a really important point, and one of the functions that I don't think was initially the intention of the scientific advisory team was to be that collaborator and that communicator. When the different stakeholders started working with Marine Map and the policy makers started working with Marine Map, they didn't know the value of whether a submarine canyon was there or not, or persistent kelp versus maximum kelp, and they needed the scientific advisory team to provide guidance about what those data layers meant and how they could be used in planning. Because otherwise it's just data, and if you're not a trained scientist, you may not have the understanding of how to best use that data to inform policy. So I think it's important as well.
We went through this with the MPA process up in the Central Coast, and it was difficult, but worth it.
Yes, thank you. I'm filled with questions and trying to parse them out in some way that brings them down to earth, I guess, from the context of the panel. But in the context of the dynamics that Dr. Arnold was talking about this morning, and some of these potentials for changes that we have not seen before, and yet we have designated, and by the way, I went to a lot of the MPA meetings and the regional stakeholder groups for Southern California, those kinds of things. We have boundaries that are spatially defined, and here it is, and you're in or you're out. But there's a context of dynamics around that, and there have been some decisions made on that. So in the context of the MLPA, we have an adaptive management framework that's supposed to help address this over time. Baselines and then looking at things changing. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how those processes will work in the future to address the adaptive management. If you have any thoughts on that. And Maddalena, for you, in the context of the potential for that addressing the future considerations around MPAs, how would a group go about including the citations in a more considered way, if there's a way to get at that?
Well,
what kinds of data would be addressed to?
Well, I think the first step, and it's not too late for that now, will be participation of the citation community. That would be the most important step. The second step would be, in my opinion, for Southern California to show, and I'm talking mostly about coastal area because those is where you make the biggest connection with the public, with the community, is to identify critical habitats for these animals. For instance, in Northern California, they did a pretty good job in doing that. For Southern California, we have area, they are a foraging hotspot for this animal. There are areas like the Santa Monica Bay where you have submarine canyons. So that you have area that can be more protected than other areas. So identify zones that are important for this animal. That would be a second step in this direction.
In terms of your question regarding adaptive management, I think it's going to be a huge challenge because of how politically charged Marine Life Protection Act is.
It was a big process already, right? It was a huge process. There happened to be money going forward. Who knows, right? So
there is funding for the initial 5-year monitoring to look at the Channel Islands, Northern Channel Islands as an example. There was a 5-year monitoring effort that was presented at a symposium, both the biological data and the socioeconomic data. The general consensus was that the marine protected areas were starting to work for things you'd expect responses from, like lobster, things that are, will show a growth in a relatively short period of time. Things like rockfish, they aren't seeing much change yet because that'll take a much longer time to see. And Fish and Game Commission basically decided that they're starting to work, so let's leave them be and continue to monitor them. and I would be surprised if we're not going to see the real adaptive changes for decades, just because we won't have really solid data, and the question of funding that data to monitor that long is a big question mark.
Yeah, I think sort of the whole data issue around this very data-intensive process, from what I can see, people working with many different kinds of data, trying to integrate it in meaningful ways for people to make decisions that were going to be set and now are in effect for a period of time. And so I guess I just see that process relative to things that you were talking about, David, and also Roy. But I don't know where to go with that. It just impressed me that access to that data is important in the process, but being able to bring people around it, get them what is the right data, right, and how will it be interpreted to make public policy decisions is a huge. So
It is, and that's where simplifying and having derived products is an important step. And again, I went through this with the NPA people. And they were asking me for the basic data products, and then they said, what do I do with them now? And I said, well, tell you what, since you work for NOAA, I'll do it for you. And that's usually the answer. It's not something that's easily scalable, but I think at a grassroots level, we wouldn't have a trouble scaring up an oceanographer or reach MPA and having them do it. And that would probably be a good thing in the overall process. But they didn't want the basic stuff. In fact, they really wanted an answer like yes or no for some products that defy having that sort of definition, unfortunately. But then they wanted things that were sort of in gradations. And that's where we sort of came to at least a sort of agreement for that time.
yeah.
And again, my interest in this is through the NESDA service as the NOAA satellite people and general information people, is providing not only that sort of something that puts that context, like an anomaly product versus a climatology. So the manager can say, well, how's it different today than it was last month or last year at this time? But also make sure that gets updated on a routine basis. So this information becomes available, it becomes familiar. Once it's in their system, they get it. And it might just be a GIS person who is looking at the oceanographic data after that point. In fact, it probably will be. Who then tells the manager, well, it's different. And here's how much. And by then they'll have these little gradations, like a +1 or a +2, or maybe a red light, green light, yellow light sort of thing, very simple.
Yeah.
They love that sort of thing. But I think that's probably what it's going to end up.
I would go even further. Part of how we decide what we work on is based on input from people and products that would be available. Often it's derived products. We have a very small group, so we can't promise anything. But when we hear of a need, someone comes and says, it'd be really nice if you had that. That's when we start thinking about pre-calculating a product that's then readily available. So that if that's a product with aid interpretation of something, it's something we can do, then we start doing that on a regular basis. But again, everything we do then is then made available to anybody to use as they want through these services or through a web page or whatever they want, so that they can use it the way they want it, not the way we think they should use it.
Okay, I think Sean was first.
I actually have two questions that kind of go to Maddalena and Sarah about the MPAs. Given the context in which they occurred, are there, first of all, when you all had these requirements, like say, 1.5 linear miles of kelp bed or something like that, was that all put together in a logical, ecological sort of framework of saying, well, if we need kelp beds, we also need some sort of pelagic area and we need these other things? Or was it kind of like, well, I vote for kelp beds and I vote for this, and oh, well, let's all put it in and see if we can get our favorite stuff. Then the other question was, we're considering MPAs for an area in Guam. We're going to have a real hard time with that. But one of the things we're trying to convince people is that other Pacific islands have shown that an MPA actually increases the catch in nearby areas. Will monitoring include the area around it for assessing the benefit of the MPA, and was that used as a selling point as you were trying to get to establishing these?
Great questions. The first one, I just used kelp as an example, but the scientific advisory team basically took all the Southern California habitats that we have and gave numerical values on your targets to meet for those in every individual MPA. And then it sort of focused us on the hotspots of where you can get the best representative sample. So not only did we get the 1.14 linear miles of kelp in Point Doom, but we got submarine canyon habitat, shallow reef, and then we got the representative habitats, and it happens to be a very productive zone for the Santa Monica Bay. The larvae that are born there make it all the way down to Palos Verdes. So I think having the guidance really focused us on finding the areas that are productive in Southern California to set as marine protected areas. And I thought they did a really good job with that guidance. I was speaking with someone at the break. There was a downside to it because we had such specific guidance and such good mapping tools. There was a game to the system. We had a divergent charge. One was meeting those habitat guidelines and one was minimizing socioeconomic impacts. And so you could just play the game of moving your polygon over one little click until you got your habitat representative sample. And it turns out that half the reef is on the east side of your MPA and half the reef is on the west side of the MPA, and most of it is sand. And so it became a situation where we split a lot of reefs and probably didn't think about holistically protecting important areas because it became a numbers game. So it will be interesting to see what the monitoring shows us for the MPAs where that happened. I think Point Doom is a good example. We've got a split reef, big kelp reef, which is really popular for spear fishing and kayak fishing. Half of it's in the MPA, half of it's out of the MPA. Maybe that will work great. Maybe it won't. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. Your other question, I'm now blanking on.
Had to do with the fisheries and if there's a benefit to being near an MPA or adjacent to it.
Right.
And will that be monitored?
The monitoring does include inside, outside, and along the line. And that happened in the Channel Islands, and the monitoring plans for Southern California, at least from the biological perspective for fish, the transects will be within, on the edge, and then a control site farther away.
Was that a selling point for establishing the MPA?
It was a selling point for establishing the MPAs. I think we had an interesting situation where a lot of the commercial fishermen weren't going to come out and be the cheerleader for MPAs, but they were willing to live with it and meet the science guidelines. Some of the recreational fishermen were thinking much more short term and where their favorite fishing hole was. And so that selling point worked with people who had the financial investment in these MPAs for their business. For people who just like to fish recreationally, it was harder to use that selling point.
Not to be cynical, but I do suspect they'll use that new phone app to just circle right around the edge of the MPAs.
Yeah.
We're actually conducting transit right now inside the MPA, and the fishermen know exactly the boundary of the MPA. You can run your transect, the boundary of your transect. They're just outside the MPA. They are perfectly aware of what's going on.
So, we have 5 minutes left, and we have 2 hands raised, Marie and Barb, and if we can get through those, then we'll be you two, otherwise we'll have to shorten continue informal. So, Marie.
David, Laura, I was wondering if you guys could I've been looking at GeoEco a little bit from Pat Alburn's group. And it seems to me that one clear difference that I see is it looks to me like you guys are providing a web service and trying to maybe do a lot more derived data products, whereas I think that GeoEco is going off and grabbing the data sets directly. Are there other differences that I should be aware of in terms of what your guys' philosophy in grabbing this and what they're doing?
I think that's one of the big ones. And he tends to the extent you get it, he has a very narrow focus, which tends to be on GIS. So you can get a WS service, which may give you a boundary, but when you're dealing with large data sets, that's not a practical service. And we're also working on services that are being implemented worldwide. So actually, a lot of the data you'd see on that EarthDAP service doesn't even reside at our place. It's dealing with sister services and a distributed system. So yeah, I mean, one of the great talks I gave at CML, Pat gave and talked about how they brought in all this satellite data and spent all this time registering everything. I did the same thing in 30 seconds right there on my desktop, bringing in the same data. And that's the difference of approach. And so yeah, it's here, give it all to me rather than say, if you can't serve it, sure, we'll serve it. But if you can serve it, then we can set a distributed system where you have control over what you do, but we can still write scripts and web pages that use it all as if it's a virtual desktop and bring it in. And again, and our focus isn't pro-GIS or anti-GIS, it's you get the data and use it as you want rather than we're deciding this kind of system that is correct. So for some people, maps are fine, but suppose I want to really look at a time trend. Maps are terrible. Okay, there's all sorts of applications that where I have a, you know, the track, I'm pulling in this satellite data with the track, I'm going to do it on a map, you know. And so we don't want to dictate the situation, we just want to have data available for all the situations. So.
Well, I would note that Patch Group also does have the MGAS software, which is similar command line to what we do.
Yes.
I've had some issues with the quality control of the satellite data that I've encountered from colleagues who used it. You're getting 5-degree temperature look in ETP, and nobody noticed. That's worrisome. But I think I've talked to them and they're going to work that out. They're a very friendly bunch.
Since the subject here is data integration, and data integration involves integrating lots of different databases, and this is just a general question, it might go beyond the panel, but I think one of the questions I have is how do you make databases sexy? Because they're really hard to finance, you know, I mean, we're sort of all living in sort of reduced circumstances, we're barely able to get out in the field, and you come back with whether it's photographic data or genomic data or whatever kind of data it is, it takes time and personnel and effort and continued time and personnel and effort to maintain a good quality database and to be able to serve that publicly. And I don't see the resources being dedicated to that. So, I mean, I think it's something that the group of scientists has to solve is how do we finance, you know, maintaining and curating good databases. It's an infrastructure thing and it's just not very sexy. So my question is, how do you make it sexy?
Great question.
How do you finance it?
Do you really want to know my answer? I don't think you do.
Well, let's hear a couple ideas. Hopefully it's in between.
Actually, I don't have ideas. I'm on, what, about 4 national committees. We have almost no budget for developing national standards. For a large period when Longterm was there, every year his AGM came out, that's annual guidance memo, because they don't know. Data is the most important. That was like his #1 priority. That translated into how much money?
I mean, it's a serious problem.
Yeah.
And they all talk about the need for distributed systems and good metadata. In fact, the EDMC just came out with a directive they're all supposed to follow. But there's a directive, but no tools, no money to do tools development, so it's easy to do. No, nothing else. You're all just supposed to magically do it. And we do it by, how many hours a week do you work, Dave? I work about 60
Way more than I
hours.
sleep, that's for sure.
I work about 60 hours a week. I wish I had a good answer. Everyone, even our higher-ups in our center, talk a good show on it, but I have a 0 budget other than my personnel to start every year. So other than the salaries, we have 0.
I actually don't have any idea how to make a database sexy because I don't think databases are sexy at all. I think you can. This is my personal.
But you're missing the point of the introduction when I showed the matrix and how the, you know, all you could see was redheads and brunettes.
Maybe it's a woman thing.
I should note, I hate to
It's a
admit it,
guy
but I
thing.
actually look at the screens like that and I understand them.
It's a guy thing.
But maybe even if you're not able to make a database sexy, you can make some of the information coming out of those databases sexy for the public. And I think that's what we should try to do a little bit better in the future. Database.
But it
Stay
still
away
doesn't
from
sell. It won't get you the money. Okay, I'd like to tell you it will.
Barb, we did talk about the OVIS database. Are you familiar with that? That's about as sexy as they come, quite frankly. It's kind of a bear to learn how to use that. But once you do, it has things like pictures embedded, things like that, stuff that we're never going to do, most likely.
And they will work with you to get your data in. You have to be 3 people dedicated to that. So.
You have to speak Latin, I think, but other than that.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid we have to stop. I hope that we can continue some kind of discussion on this, and certainly there's some interesting and useful recommendations and needs that need to be highlighted. So this is the end of our panel. Thank you everyone for sticking all the way to the end. Thank you to the panelists who made it so interesting and engaging, and thank you again to Pacific Live.